Hi, my name is Skyly Labach, and the artist that I'm going to be talking about today is Dexter Gordon. So, Dexter Gordon was also nicknamed Long Tall Dexter because he stood at 6'6", and that was kind of tall for people at that time. He was born on February 27th, 1923, in Los Angeles, California. He grew up in a time where jazz music was thriving, and this allowed him to be constantly surrounded by it, and this was especially for bebop. His father was a physician to many great jazz artists, and one of them was actually Duke Ellington. So this was another factor that exposed him to music and kind of got his foot in the door. At 13 years old, Dexter Gordon began to play the clarinet, and only 2 years later, he switched to alto saxophone, then finally tenor saxophone at age 17, and has stuck with it ever since. In his teenage years, he was lucky enough to gain exposure and performance time with musicians such as Charles Mingus and Buddy Collette. Unfortunately, Gordon died on April 25th, 1990, at the age of 67 from kidney failure and cancer of the larynx. When it comes to his sound, he was known for being large and spacious, and he had a tendency to play behind the beat. He would often insert musical quotes into his solos, and although this wasn't uncommon in jazz improvisation, Gordon did it enough to make it a staple of his music. Unlike many bebop musicians at the time who played with great detail, Gordon's playing tended to be plain and smooth, but it also had a sense of humor to it. The long lyrical solos he played kept almost every audience enticed and attentive during every performance he did. In late 1945, he recorded his first album under his own name with featured musicians that included Louis Armstrong, Billy Eckstine, and Fletcher Henderson. The label he worked for during this time was Savoy, and that is where he produced recordings such as Blow Mr. Dexter, Dexter's Deck, Dexter's Minor Mad, and Long Tall Dexter, but also many, many more. In 1947, Gordon recorded his historic sides for Dial Records, including The Chase with fellow saxophonist Wardell Gray. These tenor duels were very popular at the time, and this recording even went on to become the biggest seller for Dial and further established Dexter as a leader and recording artist. Then, in 1960, Dexter signed with Blue Note Records, where he worked for 5 years producing songs that would become known as classics today. These Blue Note recordings allowed him the chance to record with artists such as Freddie Hubbard, Bud Powell, Billy Higgins, and Bobby Hutcherson. In his 60s, he produced his most famous album of all time, Go and A Swinging Affair, and Dexter himself was actually asked what his favorite album was, and he said Go. So I found that very interesting. These and other tracks he created during the time have gone down as some of the best jazz albums during the time. Dexter Gordon had not only a huge impact on jazz, but on the music industry and society as a whole. He was actually one of the first tenor saxophonists to play bebop and actually added a complexity to it and a more muscular tone. He had a strong influence on the tenor saxophonists who came after him, especially Sonny Rollins and John Coltrane. More specifically, he influenced those whose styles were classified as hard bop because of his imaginative playing and the swing feeling that accompanied his playing and his sound. He was a favorite to critics and audiences alike all around the world because of this style. Some of his most influential performances were Tokyo 1975, At the Subway Club 1973, Walk the Blues, and several others. Most of these came from the Dexter Gordon Quartet or Gordon himself. Later in his career, Gordon went on to perform with many individuals that participated in bringing bebop to the forefront of jazz, so he was very influential with bebop, as I mentioned earlier. Besides music, Gordon was also known for his role in the film Around Midnight by Bertrand Tavernier, The story reflected on his experiences during his 15-year exile in Paris and Copenhagen, where it revealed his struggles with heroin addiction, prison, and racism. This performance earned Gordon an Oscar nomination for Best Actor. Thank you for listening to my presentation. It was very enlightening learning about Gordon and his experiences and learning more about how he's impacted our society today.